What's up guys? So in my last video I replaced the busted original construction windows in my house, and in this video I'm going to show you how to trim out the inside of the window so that you can get a finished basement look like this. Let's get into it. So here's where this project starts. As you can see, we already framed the walls and we installed the drywall in the basement. I have videos for both those projects if you want to check them out. But the big thing to note here is that I framed the walls so that they were perfectly in line with the cinder block rough-in opening, and then I put the bottom of the windowsill framing so that when I put the windowsill on top of it, it's going to contact the bottom of the window. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So taking the drywall, I'm cutting it to size with a utility knife, and as you can see here, I'm fitting it on the top so that it contacts the window and that it's flush with the front of that framing there. After installing that top piece of drywall, we're going to cut the drywall for the side. So get your measurement from the drywall at the top to the windowsill there, and then cut the drywall to size using a utility knife and a straight edge. For more information on how to cut and install drywall, you can check out my drywall installation tips video. So as you can see here, I cut the drywall to the right height, but I left it a little bit long, and then I'm going to push it all the way in so that it's contacting the side of the window, as you can see, and then I'm going to take a utility knife to score it along the face of the drywall so that it's perfectly flush with the wall, and then snap it and cut the other side of the paper. After cutting it to the right size, I used a few drywall screws and fastened it to the framing. I put about 4 or 5 screws per side of drywall. Then I repeated this process for the other side, scoring and snapping the drywall to the right size and making sure that it's perfectly flush all the way around, as you can see. A quick note is that this drywall method of trimming around a window is kind of a cheap, inexpensive way to get around the traditional window boxes that are made of solid wood that you can buy. This is again just one way you can do it. It's a little bit cheaper than buying the actual window box, but as a rental project, this is fine for my basement. Next up, we're gonna get the length and width dimensions for our windowsill. As you can see, from the window to the edge of the drywall, we're looking at about 7 inches, and here I'm gonna get the actual length. And keep in mind, I'm gonna have an overhang of about 3 inches on either side of the window, and you'll see what I mean in just a second. For my windowsill, I'm using a 1x10, and I ripped it down to about 8 inches so that we have it about an inch longer than the depth of the window. Then I cut it to the right length, and that length is the window length plus 6 inches, because I'm gonna have this 3-inch overhang on both sides of the window, which I'm scribing out now. So what I'm showing here is we're gonna cut out that larger segment at the back, and then that little part on the front is gonna overhang the window and contact the drywall when we insert this windowsill into place. You'll see what I mean in just a second. But first, I'm taking a router with a 3/4 inch roundover bit, and I'm just giving the edge of the windowsill a rounded edge. Although this isn't necessary, I think it gives it a much more professional look. After giving the edges of the sill a rounded look, I took my jigsaw and I cut out the penetrations. After cutting these out, you're gonna have that 3-inch lip on both sides of the window, and then I used some 120 grit sandpaper on my orbital sander to make everything smooth. After sanding it down, it's time to do a test fit. Let's see how we did. Not bad. It slid in there perfectly. It's contacting the drywall, and it's also contacting the back of the window there. Not bad for the first one. So after cutting out the first windowsill, I repeated this process for the other 3 windows in my basement. That's rounding over the edge, cutting out the penetrations, and then smoothing everything down with an orbital sander. But here is where I made a big mistake. I cut my windowsill to length based on the unfinished dimensions of the window. So when I actually went back and finished around the outside corners of the window by adding the corner bead and the drywall mud, I added about 1/4 inch thickness on both sides. And as you can imagine, that extra thickness made it too tight of a fit for that original windowsill to fit, and I had to trim it down, which took a little bit of time. It wasn't a big deal. I was able to go back in and trim it to the right size, but it's a lesson learned that hopefully you can avoid on your project. And I know that drywall segment was pretty fast, and it's because I have another video on my channel that shows you how to drywall around a window, so I'll link that below if you want to check it out. So after finishing the drywall around the window outside corners, you're going to go back and caulk the seam between the window and the drywall, and then I decided to paint my windowsills white. In hindsight, probably should have kept the wood look, but you live and you learn. And after painting the windowsills, I applied some liquid nails to the rough opening windowsill, and then I took the finished windowsill and put it on top, contacting the liquid nails and pushing it down in place. Then you're gonna use a level to make sure that you're both level across left to right, and also level front to back. And after everything looks good, take a brad nailer and nail the windowsill to the rough framing below. And for the sake of full transparency, 3 of my windows went perfect. One of them had this gap at the top. I don't know if I mismeasured or what, but I filled that in with some quarter round that I glued and then nailed in place with brad nails. And at this point, I simply repeated the windowsill installation process for the rest of the windows in my basement. And again, that's liquid nails, install the sill, check for level, and then nail it in place. And for this slight gap underneath the windowsill, I applied caulk just like I did for the sides of the window. Sorry I didn't show that on camera. And for the outside of the window, I used some concrete, painted it to match the foundation, and applied caulk, but all of that was covered in my previous video. At this point, you've successfully trimmed out your window. Here's a quick reminder of where we started. And here's a look at the final result. Driving around, singing songs way too loud because we wanna. Again, this is just one way to trim out a window. It's how I did it. It's not necessarily how you should do it. And if you want to see how I actually replace the old windows with the new windows, I'll leave that video here or here. It's going to be somewhere. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.